Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. We thank you for being here with us today, as we're going to be trying to take on the hefty question of what is insurrection? What is an impeachable offense, both for the president and for members of Congress? And how do we respond to that in the United States? It's a very big question, but we're going to try and bring it down to smaller terms, make it easy for everyone to understand what it is and what should happen about it. Now, if this is the first time that you've seen our program, we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you, the public, where you're able to respond to us on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, live, as long as the internet overlords allow, to give us your thoughts on what's going on in our nation and what should be going on, because we believe in free speech. We hope to see you on Sunday, every Sunday, at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to give your voice and let it be heard. Now, as for the issue for today, we're going to be talking about the articles of impeachment that are being faced by President Trump, even though he is no longer in office, and there has been a peaceful transition of power from President Trump to Joe Biden. We're going to be talking about what's going on in our Congress, as several members of Congress are being threatened with impeachment, with being removed from office if they choose not to resign, and they have chosen not to resign. Is this appropriate? Is this what America should be focused on? Is this actually legal? And is there any precedent for it? Let's really look at that. So let's start off with President Trump. Now, as it has been made very clear in the news media, President Trump has been impeached in the House, and it is now facing the Senate because of the riot that happened in Washington, D.C. on December 6th. And according to the Los Angeles Times, the truly striking thing, the thing that is the problem, why it is being called an act of insurrection by President Trump is as follows, and I quote, "The situation escalated just moments after President Trump, speaking at a, quote, Save America March, end quote, gathering at the opposite end of the National Mall, vowed to, quote, never concede, end quote, the election and urged his supporters to march to the Capitol to pressure Republican lawmakers to act with, quote, the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country, end quote, by rejecting states' election results that show Biden won." This is the full breadth and width, the depth of the insurrection that President Trump said that he disagreed with the results of the election, and along with millions of others, individuals, and in particular, the hundreds of thousands that were in Washington, D.C. at that time on December 6th, and that he was asking people to continue to fight to support him and his beliefs, just as we have seen happen before. Now, this is an interesting statement because in the article from the Los Angeles Times, the long warned against inciting violence, Trump does so with supporters' Capitol siege. This was printed on January 6th. And this document, this statement, includes only the section I've spoken about that directly quotes the alleged insurrection caused by President Trump. Nowhere in that statement, nor in any statement, is there anything that says that President Trump organized this, that he called the people together for the purpose of trying to overthrow the government. At no point and in no statement has there been any evidence by any news media of direct calls by President Trump to remove President Joe Biden, to take over the government, to install a new regime in America. There is no such statement, although people are saying these words, the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country, is a inciting statement, and that is a statement of insurrection to overthrow the government. We find that very interesting because going back to August 26th, according to NBC News, Hillary Clinton said, and I quote, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out. And eventually, I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are as focused and as relentless as the other side is. Is that an insurrectionist statement? Is that a rebellious statement? Is that a statement to say that Hillary Clinton is looking to overthrow the government or that Joe Biden should overthrow the United States government? Because it is saying not to concede. Do not concede under any circumstances. Let me look back at what was said by the LA Times that they need to take back our country with pride and boldness. That we should never concede. Isn't that exactly what Hillary Clinton said 6 months earlier? How is that not the same? If those words are the same, if the meaning is the same, if they are reaching out to supporters and saying the same thing, never to concede, how is there a difference? How is the words of Hillary Clinton not insurrectionist and those of President Trump are insurrectionist? Which one is treason? Well, let's look at this a little bit further because it's not just about President Trump. Because on January 21st, several senators sent a letter to Senator Chris Cruz and James Lankford to request an investigation against Senator Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. And some of those senators who were involved in this, their signatures are, this is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Tina Smith, Senator Mazie Hirono, Senator Ron Wyden, Senator Richard Blumenthal, and Senator Tim Kaine. Now, the summary of what they had to say, and again, in all of the documents that I am going over with you, you will see in the description in the YouTube the links to each and every one of these documents so that you can read it in full, in depth for yourself to come to your own conclusion. But they state, and their thesis, their main point is, quote, by proceeding with their objections, speaking specifically to Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, their objections to the electors after the violent attack, Senators Cruz and Hawley lent legitimacy to the mob's cause and made future violence more likely. This is the point. This is why these senators are seeking to remove Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, because in their opinion, there may be future violence. There is nothing that says that there will be. There is no declaration. No one has called for that. But that is their opinion. And in their opinion, the actions of Senators Ted Cruz and Hawley lent legitimacy to the riots in D.C. But wait a minute, that's an opinion. That's their opinion of what they did and what happened with the riots. They are not connected. There is no connection. In fact, in this document, they do understand and state that it is legal and correct for what Senators Ted Cruz and Hawley were doing. In fact, if we are to look at this, and I'm going to NPR from their article on objecting to electoral votes in Congress recalls bitter moments in history. This was published on January 5th of 2021. And in that statement, in this history of objections to electoral college votes, the NPR states, and I quote, on that day in 2001, on that January day in 2001, a procession of Democratic House members, including a dozen members of the Congressional Black Caucus, protested during the joint session. They spoke of alleged voter suppression in communities of color and said that the votes that were cast had been miscounted. They begged for at least one senator to join them so as to force a debate and a vote on the Florida electors. At one point, Vice President Gore, pleaded for an end to it. When Democratic Representative Jesse Jackson Jr. became especially impassioned, Gore stretched out his hands in a gesture of helplessness and said, quote, "I appreciate the gentleman from Illinois, but hey." Okay, 4 years later, the January 2005 joint session of Congress heard the Electoral College result from Bush's re-election over Democratic Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts, who did not attend. A House member of Ohio, Stephanie Tubbs Jones, rose to object to the count from her state. It mattered because without Ohio's electoral votes, Bush could not have had the 270 votes needed to win. Jones said there had been irregularities and defects in her state, including a lack of voting sites in communities of color. She was supported by Senator Barbara Boxer, a Democrat from California. The House and Senate separated, debated for 2 hours, and voted to accept the Ohio count as reported. Boxer was the only vote to the contrary in the Senate. In 2017, several members objected to the acceptance of the electoral vote for President Trump. "Mr. President, I object because people are horrified," said Representative Barbara Lee. Who's also a Democrat from California. The presiding officer was the vice president of that era, Joe Biden. He asked if the objection was being joined by a senator and was answered in the negative. In that case, Joe Biden said, it cannot be entertained. Republicans in the chamber applauded. So, again, we see that the objections are legal and fair and without question. And even in the cases 3 times I've just shown you, as stated by NPR, we have seen that in case after case, it is perfectly legal and right for members of Congress to have an objection to the Electoral College. Something that we have been told by the news media is unprecedented. Something we were told by the news media is wrongful and somehow is belligerent, is insurrection and treason. But yet we've seen 3 cases here, as per NPR, a left-leaning organization. This is not the case. And this is why we saw that Senator Josh Hawley has filed ethics counter complaints against the 7 Democratic senators who were called for his ouster. And in that, and I believe I have the quote here, here it is, quote, "The idea that one senator who disagrees with another senator can therefore have that senator punished, sanctioned, censured, or removed is utterly antithetical to our democracy and the very idea of open, lawful debate." Now, this is important. And I want to go to, here is the exact letter to the United States Senate, which names and is to the 7 members of the Senate that are seeking to have Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley removed. And in there, and I want to quote, Josh Hawley says, quote, "Your insinuation that Senator Cruz and I, by representing our constituents in debate in a manner you acknowledge is lawful, following the precedent set by Democratic members of Congress over the last 3 decades, somehow bear responsibility for the criminal rioters at the Capitol is shameful and false, and you know it to be so." Now, I want to be very clear, and this goes on to discuss the shameful abuse of the ethics process and to try and silence people on the First Amendment. What is clear that we have shown so far, we have shown that there is no direct words that are insightful, that were said by Senator Josh Hawley, that were said by Ted Cruz, or were said by President Trump. There is an impression, a political viewpoint held by several Democrats that disagreed with those words and therefore were called insurrectionist and terroristic and were called to be insightful. But there is no actual insightful language, and certainly nothing separate than what was said by Democrats themselves historically and in this election cycle. But let's get into this. Let's really understand what we're talking about. because we've heard this word insurrection thrown around a lot. We've heard the terms of treason thrown around a lot. We've heard a lot of crimes being alleged. Let's understand, because the American people haven't been told this, and I want to make sure we all understand what is going on in the United States government. The meaning of the word insurrection, as defined by Merriam-Webster, is an act or instance of revolting against civil authority or an established government. That is its meaning. From what was said by President Trump, what was said by Senators Cruz and Hawley, that did not happen. That factually did not happen, and there is no one in the news media that can point to the words that led to an act or instance of revolt against civil authority. There is nothing that was done by any of these individuals that was outside of the lawful allowance of their speech and to support their constituents and their supporters. And is nothing different than was done by Democrats themselves in this election cycle and those previous. But let's actually look at the U.S. 18 U.S. Code, Chapter 115, which deals with treason, sedition, and subversive activities. Because this is what is being alleged, although the American people haven't actually been told what this is and how it goes forward. What are the actual charges? What are the actual crimes that are being alleged, thrown against President Trump, senators, and, of course, the American people as well? Let's understand this. So, starting with 18 U.S. Code 2381, which is treason. It states, whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death or shall be imprisoned not less than 5 years and fined under this title, but not less than $10,000, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. This is what is being alleged by President Trump. This is what is being alleged by Senators Hawley and Cruz. Let's be very clear about that. And to further define this, to make sure that we have understood this completely, the definition of treason, again by Merriam-Webster, is the offense of attempting by overt acts to overthrow the government of the state to which the offender owes allegiance, or to kill or personally injure the sovereign or the sovereign's family. It is also the betrayal of trust. Now, while Democrats may say that the actions of President Trump, of Senators Cruz and Hawley, were a breach of trust, that is something they could possibly say. But then again, whose trust are we speaking about? The Democratic Party? Those individual Democrats? They don't owe allegiance to those individuals. They owe allegiance to the United States government and its people, and in particular, their constituents directly. Not to the Democratic Party, not to the progressive movement, and not to those individuals that have differences of opinion. So, in looking at the actual definition of the word treason and its definition under the U.S. law, we do not see that is the case. But let's understand, treason has happened in the United States. And I go to the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. We're not going to get into every single instance, but I want to make sure that we have an understanding here. The Capitol Hill Zone, which summed up on Wikipedia and many news articles, is very simply, it was sometimes called the Free Capitol Hill, the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest, the Capitol Hill Organized Protest, or CHOP, as well as the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, was, and I want to be clear, was an occupation protest and self-declared autonomous zone. Let's understand that clearly. It was an occupation of American territory on American soil involving properties that of other American citizens who may or may not, and some did not approve of. That is treasonous. An overt act to overthrow the government of the United States. That is an offense. And if we have any question about that, here goes. We had spoken about this previously. This is from our article on June 14th of 2020, Guns, Police, and Emotional Manipulation, where we talk about the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone has already had its first instance of self-appointed police violence. So we see that this resulted in the death of individuals, that this was a problem for that American territory was taken, isolated, rejected the United States laws and government and policing and law enforcement, and it caused harm to other American citizens. Both rapes, there were domestic violence, there was robbery, there was alleged, several alleged additional crimes that occurred at that time, as we documented, as the world media documented. But let's go further. Let's go to, as Business Insider stated, on July 31st, 2019, long before this came about, Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said certain communities, including in the United States, have no choice other than to riot if they feel marginalized. That's a very strong statement. Authorities recently killed an armed, self-described Antifa man in Washington after he attacked an ICE facility and used similar language to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Okay, so we see in this case that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, through her words, which incited violence and justified riots, which are violent and are crimes, incited individuals to commit harm to other American citizens and to attack the United States government. That is treasonous. Again, attempting by overt actions to overthrow the government of the United States, that is treasonous. She incited others to commit acts to try and overthrow parts of the government, to harm other individuals. It was her words, and she justified riots, crimes against American citizens and American property. Well, maybe you think that isn't quite the case. How about 18 U.S. Code 2383? Which is for rebellion or insurrection. Is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did in 2019 rebellious or insurrectionist? Well, let's find out. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid and comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Key words there: incites, engages in rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, gives aid and comfort to. This is rebellion and insurrection. That's what we're talking about. Now, did President Trump do this? Did he tell anyone to break the law? No. Did Senators Hawley or Cruz tell anyone to break the law? No. Did they do anything that was breaking the law? No. So how did they do this? They said the same thing that Democrats have said. So if what President Trump said was insightful, then what Hillary Clinton said was insightful. So we have had either they're both absolutely fine, or there is a long existing insurrection against the United States. And there's a problem because it's therefore on both sides of the government, and we have a very troubling situation to be in the United States. Is what we saw that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she is supporting violence, riots, active riots against the United States government, against agencies of the United States government, and laws of the United States government. She is against these things, and she says, and someone using her rhetoric, her words, her insightful statements, and they tried to overthrow part of the government. Is that what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did? We're going to get into that. How about sedition? Another word that you've heard thrown around since January 6th, willy-nilly. What does that actually mean? 18 U.S. Code 2384, seditious conspiracy. If two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, contrary to the authority thereof, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. So, again, going back to what happened with the Capitol Hill zone, they occupied both a police station, which is the United States government and the U.S. authority, as well as homes and properties of United States citizens against their will. That is an act of force. That is a crime. And it is seditious action, as well as being treasonous. What about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others? Well, going on, we have Hillary Clinton, who launched a new political group supporting the Trump resistance. This is from May of 2017. Onward Together, whose name and logo are a nod to her campaign's, quote, Stronger Together, quote, slogan, aims to reinforce the so-called resistance movement that has sprung up since President Trump's election. A resistance movement. This is something to put down or destroy. This is conspiring to overthrow and put down. That's a problem. To hinder and delay the execution of laws and to oppose by force the authority. That is seditious. Or how about rebellious insurrection? This is insightful, to incite something against the authority of the United States. This is engaging in a rebellion because they are a resistance. This is an insurrection against the authority of the United States because the president, the lawfully elected president of the United States, was President Trump. But that was not, no one went after Hillary Clinton. How about this? What about the resistance as stated by Congressman Jerry Nadler? That's right. How we resist Trump and his extreme agenda. So this is Jerry Nadler calling for a conspiracy. He's trying to put down and oppose by force the authority of the government. And the authority, the force he is using is the force of government itself. He is a congressman. But maybe you would say, no, that's more rebellion or insurrection, because he is insightful in his language and he is engaging in a rebellion and an insurrection. As he says, it is the resistance. He is resisting the government. He is resisting the lawful president, and he is trying to resist the laws thereof of the United States government. But he, Jerry Nadler, was not called out for his acts of rebellion, insurrection, and sedition. How about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, going back to her again? The whole point of protesting is to make people uncomfortable. Activists that take discomfort with the status quo and advocate for concrete changes. Popular support often starts small and grows. To folks who complain, protests make others uncomfortable. That's the point. December 2nd, 2020, a month before the actions in Washington, D.C. Is that not encouraging individuals to resist, to revolt, to rise up, to cause discomfort, to cause a conflict. These are her words. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, another member of Congress. How about when we go to CNN? And this is Maxine Waters in 2018, June 25th of 2018. Quote, "Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet, the cabinet of President Trump, in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. You push back on them and you tell them they are not welcome anymore, anywhere. We've got to get the children connected to their parents," Waters said at the Wilshire Federal Building, which was captured on video. And if you don't agree with CNN because you think CNN is not a good media source, well, you can go to NBC News, which covered the same event. Rep. Waters calls for harassing administration officials in public. Trump calls her low IQ. Key words, she's calling for harassing administration officials. To go with their quote, "If I saw," this is quoting, and also being stated by then current Senator Cory Booker, quote, "If I saw an administrator out and about, there is nothing wrong with confronting that person, but not to lead with love and to do it in a way that is more reflective of the values that we are trying to reject in our country is unacceptable to me." So he is also saying it is fair and fine to confront individuals, to confront our government, to try and put down our government, and to levy against them, to oppose them by force, the force of words, but again, force. And this is something that's said by Maxine Waters and Cory Booker, and is documented with video and has been reported by our news media. But if these are statements that are not seditious, if they are not rebellions, if they are not treasonous, then how can saying that we need people with the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country, just as in the same way that Hillary Clinton wanted Joe Biden to not concede, asking them not to concede? How is this somehow going to be... this is not a legitimizing a violent attack, but actually listening to their constituents and following a lawful direction that is allowed by law. Well, let's go further, because there's more things that have been alleged. Because you've heard that we see that President Trump, that Senator Hawley, Senator Cruz have advocated the overthrow of the government. Whoever knowingly or willfully advocates, abets, advises, or teaches the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States, or the government of any state, territory, district, or possession thereof, or the government of any political subdivision therein, by force or violence, or by the assassination of any officer of such government. This is it. Whoever, with the intent to cause the overthrow or destruction of any government, prints, publishes, edits, issues, circulates, sells, distributes, or publicly displays any written or printed matter advocating, advising, or teaching the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying any government in the United States by force or violence, or attempts to do so. Well, we see, again, I go back to the same things here. We go back to the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. They attempted to overthrow the United States government. They published documentation about it. They did interviews about it. This is an attempt to overthrow the government, is it not? This is advocating the overthrow of a government. By definition, to resist is to overthrow a government. This resistance is an action. You are taking force. You do not resist passively. They are talking about resistance actively. That to riot is an active action against the government, to confront individuals, to assault these individuals as they eat in their homes, at a gasoline station, at a department store, at a restaurant. This is a confrontation. This is an assault. How is this not overthrowing the government? Or is it to enlist, according to 18 U.S. Code 2390, enlistment to serve against the United States? Whoever enlists or is engaged in the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof, with intent to serve in armed hostility against the United States, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years, or both. Again, we have seen Maxine Waters, Jerry Nadler, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Hillary Clinton. These are individuals, and I'm only looking at a small section. I'm not scanning for everything. We've seen that. How about BLM? So when we hear the BLM leader go on national TV and say, we'll burn the system down if the U.S. won't give us what we want. The BLM leader nationally made this statement about violence to overthrow the United States government, to violently overthrow the United States government, and publish documentation. He published videos on this. And he is requesting others to join the BLM movement to do so. And we know that the Communist Party of the United States supports the Black Lives Matter movement. And we know that the Black Lives Matter's co-founder, another individual, Patrice Cullors, is a trained Marxist, which is against the United States government. Marxism, communism are directly opposed to capitalism and the United States government. And they, as using the Black Lives Matters format, have gone and opposed the United States government. And wouldn't you know, the Minnesota Freedom Fund received more than $30 million in donations following George Floyd's death, thanks in part to social media shout-outs from notable names like Steve Carell, Seth Rogen, and United States Senator Kamala Harris, who is the Democratic candidate for vice president. So we see, as according to the AP, as reported on August 12th of 2020, Kamala Harris directly helped to fund an organization who is supported by the Communist Party and in fact was trained as a Marxist, and whose additional leaders wish to burn down the United States government if they are not able to overthrow it and take control, which violates the enlistment to serve against the United States and violates advocating overthrow of the government. But going back to President Trump never asked anyone to overthrow the United States government. In any words, there is no statement that says that. There are people who interpret that. They have their own context on his words or take those words out of context, but he never said that. And we know that also with Senator Hawley and Senator Cruz, never said that. They lawfully acknowledged the objections that Democrats had done as well for years. So the only people we see doing that are BLM and Antifa. And this is being supported by the now vice president. So should we be not filing the enlistment to serve against the United States and advocating to overthrow a government against Kamala Harris for her support of BLM, a terrorist organization by the definition, or at the very least a seditious organization, a treasonous organization? And what about Jerry Nadler, who's calling for saying that this is all a myth? It doesn't exist. Besides his resistance, trying to therefore prop up and promote and inspire individuals, giving aid and comfort to individuals who are actively saying that they will use force to take down, to destroy the United States government, to put down our government, and to take over and have their own rule. So I've gone over in about half an hour what is actually going on. Now, I want to be very clear. I have defined and provided you the definitions of treason, of sedition, of insurrection, of the actual charges that are being placed against Republicans and conservatives because they have questions, because they have concerns, because they don't agree, because they feel exactly the same way that Democrats felt in 2001, in 2005, in 2017, that they have the same exact objections and questions that Democrats had, even in 2020. And they have never called for the same kind of acts of violence and criminal behavior as we have seen, excuse me, as we have seen in the United States being done by groups like Black Lives Matters, by Antifa, by the far left and the progressives and Democratic Socialists of America. We have never seen any of the Republicans and conservatives say they wish to take over the government. We have not seen them act to take over the government. We have seen riots, which I have denounced and I continue to denounce, but that is not the same thing as an insurrection. Because if it were, we would have seen how many people in BLM over the summer of 2020 that should be arrested, that should be convicted of treason in the United States. And we have members of Congress that need to be held accountable. By the way, it's still not done because there is still the 18 U.S. Code 241, conspiracy against rights. If two or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in the state, territory, commonwealth, possession of the United or district, in the free exercise of enjoyment of any right or privilege secured by them by the Constitution or the laws of the United States, or because of having this so exercised, this is a crime. And let me go further. 18 U.S. Code 372, conspiracy to impede or injure an officer. If two or more persons in the state, territory, possessions, or district conspire to prevent by force, intimidation, or threat any person from accepting or holding office, trust, or place of confidence under the United States, or from discharging the duties thereof, or to induce them by likely means any officer in the United States to leave the place where their duties as an officer is required to be performed, or to injure them, and it goes on, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 6 years or both. You know who's doing that? How about Tammy Duckworth, who decided that she wants to use the United States military to go after retired members of the United States Armed Forces. If you are in the United States Armed Forces and you are retired, you are a civilian. The United States, the Unified Military Code of Justice does not apply. And there should be no case where the United States military would go after civilians and impose military law against civilians. But Tammy Duckworth has asked for that and has called United States citizens neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and conspiracy theorists without any proof of any of these statements or any of these allegations. She is looking to punish American citizens unjustly, which goes along with the actions and the wordings of what we have seen from people like Maxine Waters, who sought to punish American citizens and individuals in the government from doing their duty, just as we have seen with the 7 senators who have tried to remove the senators Cruz and Hawley. This is a demonstrative problem, folks. And think about it. We have people like Senator Manchin, who is saying that we need to remove, using the 14th Amendment, to remove Senators Hawley and Cruz. Again, removing their right, their rights. And it's a conspiracy, Duckworth and Manchin, a conspiracy against the rights of American citizens, and it is a conspiracy to impede or injure officers in their duties for the United States government. If people want to play this game of, I don't like what you have to say, I don't agree with you, and you should be punished for it, well, Democrats really should be watching out, because as I have just shown, we have a host of Democrats who have committed crimes, and more clearly and more definitively have committed crimes under the United States codes than any Republican that they have identified. And that's just with a brief review of documents that are available to everyone on the internet, in video, and so forth. What we are looking at is not, when we see the president is being impeached after leaving office, that's not about protecting the American people. That's about intimidation, fear, and control of the United States government now and in the future. When we see that there are individuals trying to kick out members of the United States Senate because of their political affiliation, that's not to protect the American people. That's not punishment for a crime. That is taking control by fear and intimidation, trying to take control of the United States government, to overthrow. That is a coup. That is treason, insurrection. That's sedition. And it is direct, based on their words, based on the laws. Now, you may disagree with me. You may say, Mike, you have misunderstood these laws. Your examples are not clear enough. And if that's the case, I would like to hear you explain how they are not, because we believe they are very clear. And these are just a handful of examples that can be made for this case. But you may disagree. And we look forward to hearing that, because we believe in the First Amendment. And just because that we have provided this evidence and we have shown this to you and gone over this, you may disagree with that. And at this moment in America, it's okay to disagree. So we invite you to write your comments, to tell us what you think, and to join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to voice your opinion. But most of all, if you have found this to be informative, if you enjoyed this, then we ask you to like it, to share it with others so that they may comment on it, and also to learn where to find these rules and laws and to give their viewpoints on it. And finally, please do subscribe so that others may be able to find this information and to give their voice to it, whether in agreement or disagreement, because that's what America should be about, as opposed to what it's becoming about. But we thank you, and we hope that you have a great day.